I want to open it up now to the audience. Can we have the lights on? So, in the audience, there were two thoughts that were coming to my mind. One is, how many of you have a similar experience of similar experiences of going finding some wild food in your areas? Can we have a raise of hand? People who might have some experiences of going finding wild foods. We all have these experiences, right? And the films probably make us, go back to those experiences and think about them. So, given that context, I wanted to ask, if how are you feeling about after seeing these films, and is there some question or comment that you have to the filmmakers on the house on these films? Let's just pass it around a bit, and then we come back to them.
So I was just wondering, like, how did you, what was the process? And, just talk a little bit about your journey with mushrooms and how you ended up in Meghalaya and the process of, how much durationally you were shooting and the research and the script and, all of it, if you can put it together.
So the film is started off as discovery to understand ethnomycology in India. So ethnomycology is the study of fungi with relation to culture, tradition, history, stories, things that extend beyond just food or identifying fungi. So that was the starting point of understanding, do we as Indians have a rich ethnomycological history? And when we did that, we found that there were 5 states that we identified as mycophilic. Mycophilic meaning love for fungi, who have a more affinity towards it, who have worked with fungi for a very long time. And Meghalaya was one of them. It was Meghalaya, Orissa, Jharkhand, Himachal, and Kerala. These were the 5 states. Meghalaya was the first because I knew people there. I had a friend from there, and it was easy to kind of access. When we went there, I think we had 2 recce trips that we went through, and the first recce trip was to kind of scope about stories, about traditions. Was there anything beyond, just knowing fungi as food? And we found these 3 very wonderful people and the idea was to tell the story of the people and not the story of the fungus. It was about telling the story of the people who work with the fungi, because when we're looking at fungi and we understand them deeply, we're also forgetting how interwoven they are with life, which is why we even use one of those lines, fermentation is one of the oldest manifestations of the relationship. And it starts with something as simple as your wine or your cheese or your bread, right? So the process started with understanding different kinds of stories if there was more. And the first story we came was Kongs in the Khasi Hills. Kong Mem and Kong Quincy, they are foragers for the last 25 years, 25 to 30 years, but they don't do foraging from a point of view of I need these mushrooms to eat or to survive. It was more for foraging for the sake of keeping the tradition alive, which she said, right? Counsel from her mother, from her sisters. She has passed this knowledge down from her grandmothers. So she is just keeping the tradition alive to keep the tradition alive. And she has a group of 25 women with her, and they go every monsoon to the forests and forage. So that was one story where it was about just keeping a tradition alive, not necessarily for the sake of sustenance, but just for the sake of understanding these local names, understanding the songs that come about, understanding whether, when she says goodbye mushroom, why we showed that was, it's not that she actually talks to the fungi. She says that unless we speak to them and we build a relationship with them, they won't come back the next year. And she says we sing these songs every year. So that was one story. The second one was of Soching and Nikre. They live in a place where fungi are sustenance. And if you notice that the story that happened there was more from a very poignant place. When we started that process, we went in February, and that time, there was a lot of fungi. They said, yeah, come back, it will be there. And then we went to shoot in May, and Meghalaya was actually going through one of the worst heat waves that they've seen in the last 20 years. And we didn't know what to do because we said, okay, there's going to be no mushrooms, there's going to be no fungi, but it is what it is. And we have to tell that story now. And the story became of what you saw, a reflection of, of loss, of, when we even went to meet her again, she said, I don't even know what to show you. There's no fungi. I said, let's just tell the story because there is no fungi. It didn't come this year. And there was also that feeling of hope that they will push. She uses this line, they will push through this hardness. It was also a way of her telling us that we can also survive all this. She says, why are we even called mega? I mean, we've not put a lot of those cuts in the film, but through that conversation, she started to cry and she said, I don't even know why we're even called Meghalaya anymore. Why are we the abode of clouds when there's no rain? And the fungi know this. So they have such a deep relationship with it that they said, we have not been true to our roots. We have not practiced our religion the way we should. And that is why these gifts of the creators don't come. And it became a totally different story. So when we went thinking that, we'll go and just talk to them about how it would be, it was a heat wave. We were confused. So we said, okay, this is what it is. We have to tell the story. So that was the second story of a lot of loss, a lot of, sadness surrounding this ecosystem, and also a very close ecological relationship with the forest that they have. They feel it. And there was a lot of Nikre thinking about all of this.
ಇವಾಗ ಏನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅಂದರೆ ಇವಾಗ ನಾವೇನು ನಾವೇನು ಅಣಬೆ ಮಶ್ರೂಮ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನು ನೋಡ್ತೀವೋ ನಾಯಿ ಕೊಡೆ ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೀವನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಪ್ರಾಮುಖ್ಯತೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಒಂದು ವೈನ್ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು, ಚೀಸ್ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮದೇ ದೋಸೆ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು, ಅದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಫರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮಗೆ ಫಂಗೈ ಬೇಕೇ ಬೇಕು. ಫಂಗೈ ಇಲ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ತಿನ್ನೋದಕ್ಕೂ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಬ್ರೆಡ್ ಸಿಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನಮಗೆ ದೋಸೆ ಸಿಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಆಯಿತಾ? ಸೊ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಹಾಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಇವರು ಮೂವಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಬೇರೆ ಇತ್ತು. ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿರುವಂಥ ಮಶ್ರೂಮ್ಗಳ ವೈವಿಧ್ಯತೆನ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡೋದು, ಅದು ಹೇಗೆ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಅವ್ರ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಅಂತಿತ್ತು. ಆದರೆ ಆ ವರ್ಷ ಮಳೆ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ವರ್ಷ ತುಂಬ ಕ್ಲೈಮೇಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇತ್ತು, ಮಳೆ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಮಶ್ರೂಮ್ಗಳು, ಫಂಗೈಗಳು ಯಾವುದು ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಮೂವಿದು ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಟೇ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಿ ಆ ಚೇಂಜಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಲೈಮೇಟ್ ಹೇಗೆ, ಆ ಚೇಂಜ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಥರ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟೀಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮೂವಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಅವರ ಪೂರ್ವಜರು ಅಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಅಜ್ಜಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅವ್ರ ಮುತ್ತಜ್ಜಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅವರು ಹೇಗೆ ಈ ಫಂಗೈನ ಮಶ್ರೂಮ್ಸ್ನ ಅವ್ರ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೋ ತರ್ತಿದ್ರು, ಹಾಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಅವರಿಂದ ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಇವರೊಂದು 20 ಜನ ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು ಹೇಗೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅದೇ ಟ್ರೆಡಿಷನನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಆ ಮೂವಿ ಇತ್ತು.
I want to just come back to you, Ulhas. In terms of, your sort of, we heard this in the film that we are 8 billion people. And imagine if 2 billion were to vanish, We heard that in the film. And I'm kind of resonating that with also her saying goodbye. But also she's saying goodbye, but she's hoping they'll come back, right? But they may not come back. So just wanted you to also reflect from this perspective, because we are talking about climate change. We are talking about it in that context kind of thing. And as an educator particularly, what is the kind of discourse that you think needs to be created to have these conversations, to actually bring these issues to the fore, that there is something happening and maybe we have a part to play. We do have a part to play. What is it that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, conservation, the word itself, is the opposite of evolution, right? I mean, we are trying to preserve things as we know, right? Versus letting it, be what it needs to happen. Now, why are we talking about conservation? Is because we want to preserve our way of life. We want to preserve it as we know it. But it's not the same way of life maybe our grandparents had, right? And one of the bigger changes that we see today, especially when I speak to younger children, is that they're all rooted to devices. And these devices came only in around 2010, right? And it's not too far out. I mean, it was like 15 years ago, but their whole life revolves around it now, right? And how do you bring about, narratives that bring more connections between them and the outside world, between them and appreciating what is there around them, is what we focus on. And some of these things, like even if you, so everything is very anthropocentric, right? We talk about why is it important to us? Why is it, how do we feel this 2 billion of us go away, right? And while these are examples that we set in terms of comparing it as a yardstick, I think it's important to understand that everything in nature has a part to play, and it's an interwoven fabric. And pulling one thread would mean that a lot of the fabric would also get affected, right? And how we understand that intricacies of this interwoven fabric is important, and building those bridges towards appreciating what is the world around them is what we focus on. We don't talk about pollution. We don't talk about solid waste management. We only focus on biodiversity. We only focus on the beautiful parts of nature in most of the activities that we do. And the example that I give is, if you have a stranger who's fallen down, maybe you will go and lift him up and take care of him. Maybe you will not, because you have a busy day and you'll move on. But if it's your friend or your family member who's fallen down, you'd go and probably take a day off from your office and do something about it, right? So unless you know what you have around your homes, unless you know what you have and recognize them as part of your life, you will not go to the rescue. If a tree is being cut down and if you don't know what the tree is, the empathy that you would have towards protecting that is far less than if you knew what it was, right? So, and I think these movies actually bring about creating that empathy quite a lot to lesser known creatures, and not about the tiger or the elephant, but to things that are absolutely important for our life on this planet. ಇವಾಗ ನಮಗೆ ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಏನಿದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ಕುತೂಹಲ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ರೆ, ನಮಗೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಉತ್ಸಾಹ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ರೆ, ಮಕ್ಕಳುಗಳಿಗೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಪ್ರೊಟೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಮನಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ. ನಾವೇನು ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತ ಯಾವ ಪ್ರಾಣಿ ಇದೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತ ಯಾವ ಮರ ಇದೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತ ಯಾವ ಗಿಡ ಇದೆ, ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಇರಬೇಕು, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಬೇಕು. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಯಾವ ಮರ ಕಡಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಹೋಗಿ ಸೇವ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಪಾಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಆ ಬ್ರಿಡ್ಜ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಇವಾಗ ನನಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಆ ಮರಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಇದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ನನಗೆ ಆ ಪಕ್ಷಿಗೆ ಏನು ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಇದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ನನಗೆ ಆ ಚಿಟ್ಟೆಗೆ ಏನು ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಇದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ನಾವು ಇವಾಗ ಮಕ್ಕಳುಗಳು ಅಂದರೆ ಬರೀ ಫೋನು, ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟ್ ಫೋನು, ಟ್ಯಾಬ್ಲೆಟ್ಟು ಬರೀ ಅದ್ರನ್ನಲ್ಲೇ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅದರಿಂದ ಈಚೆ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಬಂದು ಹೇಗೆ ಪರಿಸರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇಂಟ್ರ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದು. ಬರೀ ಈ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಬರೀ ಊರುಗಳದಲ್ಲ, ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಇದೇ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಇವಾಗ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟ್ ಫೋನ್ ಬಂದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆನೂ ಇದೇ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಎಲ್ರೂ ಗೇಮ್ನಲ್ಲೇ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ, ಎಲ್ರೂ ಗೇಮ್ ಆಡ್ಕೊಂಡೇ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಂದು ಎಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ ಯಂಗ್ಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ತೋರಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ.
I want to come to you, Rajani, because I'm taking from the cue from what Ulhas said, about some species that live very around us, very close to us, but we are not talking about them. And your lens really goes to them. So just also the film is your story, but also wanted you to reflect on mushroom keepers and how that links as well, and take us through why this and how important it is for all of us also to acknowledge and visualize.
Yeah, I think Ulhas very clear, like succinctly expressed just now that these are the lesser known species that we live with. They are our neighbors, and we interact with them all the time. Be it, I mean, even mushrooms for that matter. When it rains, you'd see them growing in your yard or in your pot. Same thing with the bees. It's all around us, and that could be one of the reasons that we overlook them, right? But they because of changes in climate, because of all the anthropogenic changes around us, all of these species are affected, and
with me, I can say the reason. It's a pretty common story in high-rise apartment complexes in Bangalore to have the bees making hives and people spraying pesticides. It was happening in my society, and since I was the local conservator of all things small and big, people would come to me, and then I was literally looking at I was looking at films that I could screen and create awareness about the bees, and I found that there was none. There was the only film that was there on the Hejenu was by Mai Pandey, which is the honey hunters of Nilgiris, and so those films were all from the perspective of the humans and how difficult it is. The terrain is difficult. The bees sting. I felt like there were no films really that were telling the story from the Dorsata's point of view. I mean, what are the various situations that the bee was facing? And so that is what led me to make the film. And similarly I find that correlation with her film as well, where the the fungus, the mushrooms, they are a huge part of the culture and history of that community, right? Whether it's in their spiritual, pujas that they do, or it's in their cooking. It is in such small ways that they are part of our lives. And for even for the people of the tribes in Meghalaya, where they're experiencing a sudden loss of that particular kind of mushroom not being available anymore. It's a huge loss for them, and they can't comprehend. They cannot wrap their head around that they are not responsible, in fact, for these things that they are affected by. So I think more films like this should get made, I guess, about the smaller, lesser known species.
ಯಾ ಈ ಥರ ಮೂವಿಗಳು ನಮಗೆ ತೀರಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಫೋಕಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇಲ್ದಿರೋವಂಥ ಪ್ರಾಣಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನೋ ಜೀವಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತೋರಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಇದು ಯಾವ ಥರ ಅಂದರೆ ಇವಾಗ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆನ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಣಬೆ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ಇದು ನಮಗೆ ಆನೆ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಹುಲಿ ಅಲ್ಲ, ದೊಡ್ಡ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಪ್ರಾಣಿಗಳಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ನಮಗೆ ತುಂಬ ರೊಮ್ಯಾಂಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ನೋಡುವಂಥದ್ದಲ್ಲ, ಆದ್ರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತ ಇರೋವಂಥದ್ದು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಇರೋದು ತುಂಬ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಈ ಜೀವ ವೈವಿಧ್ಯತೆ ನಮ್ದೇನಿದೆಯೋ ಅದು ಹೇಗೆ ಲಾಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ, ಅವ್ರ ಮಿಸ್ಟೇಕ್ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ಅವರು ಇವಾಗ ನಾರ್ತ್ ಈಸ್ಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಅವ್ರ ಮಿಸ್ಟೇಕ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಆದ್ರೂ ಆ ಅಣಬೆಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಹೊರಟೋಯ್ತು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ವಿಚಾರ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ತರಬಹುದು ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತೋರಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತು ಮೂವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು.
I just want to add the same thing that which I was trying to say in the film as well. That because of our actions or our overlooking the importance of Dorsata's role in pollination, it, as I was trying to highlight in the film, it's probably the farmers that get affected, and then it would reduce the food production or whatever. So that's the link that I was really trying to kind of bring about.
ಅದೇ ದುಂಬಿಗಳು ಹೋಗೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಇಲ್ಲ ಈ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆನ್ ಹೋಗೋದ್ರಿಂದ ರೈತರಿಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಬೆಳೆ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಇವಾಗ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಮೂವಿನಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಒಬ್ಬಂಗೆ ಮೂರು ಗೋಣಿ ಚೀಲ ಕಾಫಿ ಬದಲು 2 ಗೋಣಿ ಚೀಲ ಕಾಫಿ ಬಂತು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಅದ್ರ ತೋರಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. 1/3 ಆಫ್ ದೇರ್ ಕ್ರಾಪ್ ಗೋಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಸ್ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಅಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಟೆಡ್ ಟು ಡಾರ್ಸೆಟಾ ಅಂತ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು 100 kg ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೋ ಬೆಳೆತಾರೋ ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ 30 kg ಬಂದು ಬರೀ ಒಂದು ಹೆಜ್ಜೆನಿಂದ ಬರೋಂಥದ್ದು ಅಂತ ತೋರಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು.
I want to just go back to the audience and then I want to come back to you, Prithvi. Anybody in the audience that wants to say something? Yeah, can you call?
So this angle of play is what I want to talk about, and this is something that I've seen in both the movies. In the fungi movie, it's about the people doing it for the very act of it, right? And in the case of Praniti, eventually, liking the bees, not just out of curiosity, but just I just like observing them, and I feel for them, empathizing with them later.
That was the magic of COVID lockdown.
Yeah, right. So it got her closer with nature, and it's a very, in a way, it also relates to the earlier movies that we saw. That many times we're trying to tell people that okay, we are suffering, but you don't know it. But then there are others who would not expect to, like the people of Mount, like, no, we were good when we were living on the streets, and then we know that we are suffering now, right? So this is an education kind of an angle, and my question rather is like, how did you individually, both of you, come up to that angle, that treatment of your script? So overall, I really like the movies. Apart from the points that they made and the content, I think it's a very good filmography overall. It was really great to watch. And this treatment of the scripts were also pretty good. But to this particular angle about having a play with nature, what do you guys think about it? Was it conscious that you ended up over there, or were you just playing with your scripts?
A documentary filmmaking is it's a long process, especially feature documentaries. So the version that you saw over here was a 52-minute TV cut. The original film, Colonies film, is 74-minute in duration. It's a feature-length documentary. So when you to make feature-length documentaries, we really like immerse ourselves in the topic. And I'm especially with me, I love research. I think that's my kind of strong suit, and I really, deep dived into the topic. I spent a lot of time understanding, the dorsata, the angle of the urban angle. I was kind of clear with, because I'm living in the city. This is something I see around me, right? It happens in my neighborhood. Pranita is my upstairs neighbor. So there was something I was familiar with, but what I was not familiar with was the insect itself. So I spent a lot of time researching, and eventually the scientist that I was interacting with the most, which is Axel. Axel even came on board as a co-producer at some point when I ran out of money, right? So to eventually come to the storyline, as how are we going to introduce this? For me, see, a story can be told in many different ways. Now, if I give the footage to her, for example, she will edit another version of the story. I can do a story with just, with just Venkat, because he's also a very fabulous character, and he really, it can be very attractive. It would be amazing in an international market. There were all of these thoughts, but the very core of why did I want to make this film was really to educate, was to tell about bees, what, because we keep going back to the science, we keep going back to the behavior in the film. So that was something I was very, very conscious. So now, if let's say you want to make a film on bees, you don't have to educate, because I've taken that off your plate. When you're watching a film on elephants, you're watching a film on tigers, you can do a story, you can do different things, because the real stuff has already been made. It's been being made over and over again. We watched thousands of films on them, right? With bees, there was nothing. So it was a very a very concerted decision on my part to make the film in this particular manner. Yeah.
So I like the point on play. I think the idea here is maybe a step a little ahead of what you were saying. There was no story on bees at all. Here, people have made films on fungi identification. They've gone out, spoken about habitats. There are films that there's something called Fantastic Fungi, which covers a whole gamut of it. But the idea was to tell the story in India and unveil the ethnomycology, like the tradition, and the people became the center point of the film. And when we started out, like I said, I think we found three people that we wanted to tell these three different stories, but we had no script. To be very honest, we had no idea how that conversation would pan out, because one of the things in our ethical guidelines is that we would not want to force them to say anything they don't want to share. The reason being, ethnomycology across the world has a very has a sordid past. It has a bad past because it started in Mexico when this corindera, her name is Maria Sabina, she was extracted and lured with information and taken, and it was wrong. Like, she was lured to give that information about these mushrooms, which are hallucinogenic. And so, because of this past, when we wanted to tell the story of the people, we wanted to keep the conversations free flowing. So the camera was rolling whenever they wanted it to roll, and we let the conversations go as and when. Of course, we told them, take us to the place you would forage, or tell us about how the bitchi is made, the rice wine. But where that would lead, we didn't know. So I would say there was a lot of play, there was a lot of observation, especially when you're working with something like fungi and you're in these environments that are so unpredictable. It was raining one day, we couldn't shoot. So the script had themes that there was Conquency, the forager, there was Nikre, and who were livelihood dependent on it, and there was, of course, the healer or the traditional aspects, the spiritual aspects, where he wanted, because we have spoken to them in the past, but where that conversation would have led when we actually went to shoot was completely spontaneous. And in fact, even when you see the healer drawing those boundaries in the film, he didn't really do that when we first met him, and he just showed it to us that day, and he said, you know, this is how we give the rice wine back. And so we said, okay. So yeah, there is a lot of play. The script it's a short film, so it was spread across 3 months, constantly going back, speaking to them. But yeah, I think it was playing a little more more or less on the educational part, because ethnomycology is also about people, personal stories, oral history, things that can't always be written down. And one more thing about it is, because it was oral history and a lot of that, we chose film as the medium rather than, you know, photos or literature. So
We always try to, look at it as to what's the use of birds or any of these things. And bird watching in Bangalore itself is again a catch-all term, right? I mean, it's been going on for about 50 years now, but more than 50 years. And I think most of the researchers in Bangalore have been through that, the larger bird watching community in Bangalore at some point in time. But the point is that when you start looking at, like today morning I was out birding at Lal Bagh, right? I mean, second Sunday, walk at Lal Bagh, and we had about again 35-40 people, and we get to meet a lot of people over the 5 Sundays, 4 Sundays, whenever there's a fifth Sunday. And the thing is, what we see is that with equipment and with knowledge being accessible, there's been a huge change, right? A shift in terms of people being interested. When I started bird watching, there was nothing. There was no internet. There was nothing. There were no books, right? I used to borrow binoculars and watch birds for 7 years. And today, everything is accessible, right? And with that kind of knowledge also comes, I mean, kind of information also comes a lot of responsibility. And if people only focus on tigers or elephants or all the charismatic megafauna as we call it, then what happens is it's always one single view of the prism, right? And it's never the entirety of what exists. And I think these two movies have been wonderfully made. And like she said, there was no movie on bees, and she took it upon herself to make this movie because there was no narrator, right? And being the first to narrate something which is meaningful is, I think, a great thing. And the same thing with the movie on mushrooms with an Indian context, because there's nothing, absolutely nothing with an Indian context. And I think both these movies play a significant role in making people understand and making people relate to what is around them. And I think it's important.
We have a question here. Please go ahead.
ಜೀವ ವೈವಿಧ್ಯತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ನೇಚರ್ ಡೈವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಎರಡು ಮೂವಿಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನನಗನ್ಸೋದು ತುಂಬ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಬಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಬೆಳವಣಿಗೆಗೆ. ನಾವಿವತ್ತು ಏನು ಹಲವಾರು ವೈವಿಧ್ಯತೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ವಿನಾಶದ ಹಂಚಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಬದುಕ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಥರ ಸಂಶೋಧನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದು ಸುಮಾರು ಜನ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೈ ಹಾಕೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ಈ ಎರಡು ಫಿಲಮ್ಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿರುವಂಥದ್ದು ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಹಿಂದೆ ನೋಡಿದಂಥ ಫಿಲಮ್ಗಳು ತುಂಬ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಬಲ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾವೆ, ನಮಗೆ ಮಾಹಿತಿಯನ್ನು ಒದಗಿಸಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಏನಂದರೆ ಈ ಸಸ್ಯ ಸಂಕುಲ ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಇದೆ. ಸಸ್ಯ ಸಂಕುಲಕ್ಕೆ ಬರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಹಕ್ಕಿಗಳು ತುಂಬ ಕೊಡುಗೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತವೆ. ಅದರ ಬೀಜೋತ್ಪಾದನೆಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಕಡೆಗೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಜರ್ನಿ ಮಾಡಿಸಿ ಅದನ್ನು ಬಿತ್ತನೆ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಇನ್ಸೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಬರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ತುಂಬ ಕೊಡುಗೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತವೆ ಈ ವೈವಿಧ್ಯತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ. ಇವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲವನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಕಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂಥ ಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಹವಾಮಾನ ವೈಪರೀತ್ಯಗಳಿಂದ ನಾವು ಕಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇನ್ನಷ್ಟು ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ವಹಿಸಿ ಇಂಥ ಸಂಶೋಧನೆಗಳು, ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ಗಳು ಮುಂದಾಗಿ ಇದನ್ನು ಸರಳೀಕರಣಗೊಳಿಸಿ ಜನರಿಗೆ ತಲುಪಿಸುವಂಥ ಕೆಲಸನ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ತುಂಬ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯದು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ನನ್ನ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯ.
Yeah, I think he just shared an opinion about how important the movies were, and how making it more easily understandable has really contributed to spreading awareness about the topics, and how climate change also plays a very important role in how we are losing things around us and the biodiversity. And he also mentioned about how birds and insects play a role in not only pollination, but also taking and dispersing seeds, because they eat a lot of fruit and they go and poop somewhere else. So they spread a lot of they disperse a lot of seeds. And I think one other thing that we forget are bats, fruit bats. I think they play the maximum role in spreading trees. I mean, they are the biggest tree planters in the world, right? And I think losing any of these things would be very, very detrimental to all of us.
Uh, I just thought if we can have some last words on this panel, and I think there will be lunch conversation. So Shilpika, you can take it into lunch. But just this theme in which these two films are curated is flora, fauna, and habitat. So when you look at that in this whole debate and context of climate change, what is crucial for you as like a key takeaway for all of us? In that context, from from that perspective.
So I think something that Ulhas mentioned is the key takeaway. To be very honest, it is just looking at the ecosystem less from a human perspective and more from their perspective. Embodying what it means to be a bee, understand why the bee is there, why is that fungus growing in your garden, what are you even doing, who are you in this ecosystem. I think the biggest takeaway in climate change is to be less anthropocentric, be less obsessed with being a human, and be a little more obsessed with understanding what may be your role in this whole life. And automatically, I think this whole climate crisis and we trying to save the planet will stop, because you will automatically be less impactful in the way the climate is going. You will automatically be more caring, you will build more empathy, and life will be a little less lighter on this planet. Rather than us being the saviors, we are just merely another participant in this larger game of life. So, key takeaway is, less obsession with the human and more obsession with the interwoven web that we call life.
Yeah, very well said. And she echoes my thoughts as well. The only thing I would just like add along with this is that to observe nature, we don't really need to, venture to only national parks and, faraway places. Nature is all around us. And even all of these things that we talk about, being less obsessed with ourselves, being, more mindful of the nature. We can all start looking at nature, right? Even if you're living in a high rise apartment, there's the spaces there, there'll be like wild shrubberies, lake sites. Just start observing, start being more mindful about the creatures that within urban areas that we share our habitat with. I think that would be a very nice way to start.
Yeah, both of them put it very well. It has to do with what is around us, and I think knowing what is around us is far more important than knowing what is there maybe in the polar regions. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important, but if you ask people to name 10 birds, they will say ostrich, they'll say penguin, right? They will not name our own birds, right? And I'm talking about birds because birds are more well known than mushrooms or bees, right? But despite that, people won't be able to name 10 Indian birds. Forget Indian birds, they won't be able to name 10 birds around their homes, right? And if you ask them about butterflies, they'll say, yeah, butterfly. They won't, even know what the name of the butterfly is, because, and I think that empathy needs to come, because if you don't know what you're protecting, I don't think you will have the same involvement as you should have if you knew what you were protecting. And it's fairly important that we look at what we have around us, and these could be mushrooms. I mean, like bird nest mushrooms, or the whale lady. I mean, these are things that you see outside your homes. Like we had the dead man's finger, in our own pot, and it's so wonderful to watch them. It's so wonderful to learn about them. But then the problem is that we hardly know about it, and we are like this. For a lack of a better term, we are like this big bulldozer, right, running through this whole farm where we don't know what we are crushing under because we don't care, right? And that caring has to come, and I think that's important. And I see things changing with information being accessible, with equipment being accessible, with people, all of you being here on this Sunday. It's proof enough that things are changing, right? And I think it's fairly important, and these movies are absolutely in the right direction and wonderfully made. Thank you so much. Thank you. ನಮಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತ ಏನಿದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಇರಬೇಕು, ನಮಗೆ ಕುತೂಹಲ ಇರಬೇಕು, ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಅದಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಇದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನನ್ನ ರಕ್ಷಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಅಂತ ನಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಏನು ರಕ್ಷಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಅಂತ ನಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗದೇ ಇದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇನ್ವಾಲ್ವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಸಿಕ್ಕಾಪಟ್ಟೆ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾವುದೋ ಗಿಡ ಹೋಗ್ತಿದೆ, ನಾಶ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ, ನನ್ಗೇನಾಗಬೇಕು, ಯಾವುದೋ ಪಕ್ಷಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಿದೆ, ನನ್ಗೇನಾಗಬೇಕು. ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತ ಇರೋ ಒಂದು 10 ಪಕ್ಷಿಗಳ ಹೆಸರು ಗೊತ್ತಿದ್ರು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಸಾಕು. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತ ಇರುವಂಥ ಒಂದು 10 ಇರುವೆಗಳು, ಒಂದು 10 ಜೇನುನೊಣ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು 10 ಮಶ್ರೂಮ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು 10 ಚಿಟ್ಟೆಗಳಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪನಾದ್ರೂ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಇಲ್ಲದೇ ಇದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ, ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಆಸ್ಟ್ರಿಚ್ ಇದೆ, ಪೆಂಗ್ವಿನ್ ಇದೆ, ಬರೀ ಅವುಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತು ಹೊರತು, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಮಗೆ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಜಿಯೋಗ್ರಫಿಕ್ನಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಂದ ಅದೇನೇ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿರೋದು. ನಮ್ಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತ ಇರೋಂಥದ್ದು ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಇವಾಗ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಈ ಥರ ಮೂವಿಗಳು ಬಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದ್ದು ಪರಿಸರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದ್ದು ವೈವಿಧ್ಯತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇವಾಗ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಇದು ತುಂಬ ಉಪಯೋಗಕರ ಆಗಿರುವಂಥ ಮೂವಿಗಳು. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
No, just wanted to say that two of the projects that BSF, Bengaluru Sustainability Forum, have supported are very closely related to what is being spoken here and the film. So I would just like to introduce them. One of them is the Avenue Trees of Bangalore, which in fact Ulhas has been a part of. It is available both in English and Kannada. So please, do take a look and you would find it probably very useful to build that connection with the trees that we see around us. And the second was a project called Bee Hotel. So one of the things, about getting, so with increased concretization, bees are not having spaces to nest in cities and urban areas. And so that project looked at making available spaces where solitary bees can, nest, and thus we can sort of help them revive and find places to coexist with us. Very small efforts, but these are probably steps that we can take to sort of encourage, sort of exchange and protection to these small creatures that we inhabit the space with. So please go visit the BSF website for more information or get in touch with us and we'll guide you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just to kind of round it up, I think from wild mushrooms to wild bees, from indigenous knowledge and people sort of making foraging and making sure that the fungi keep coming back, to to coexisting with the bees as part of, as us part of their lives, and not they part of our lives, to push away or sort of pesticide out, to let the pollination sort of go on and to build these connections, because pollination is the same thing, right? What we are trying to do here, we're trying to build a connection, a community through cinema, and to have habitat as central for everyone that breathes, I guess. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you.